All right, this is Greg Pass with the Americans in Wartime Museum, and I have with me John Newton Fry, and we're in Manassas, Virginia, and today's date is October the 22nd, 2014. All right, Mr. Fry, can you give me your full name?
My full name is John Newton Fry.
And where are you from, Mr. Fry?
I was born in Oklahoma, Stroud, Oklahoma, and I left there at the age of 4 months, I think.
And do you have any military veterans in your family?
Yes, my father was in World War I.
And what did he do?
He was a machinist mate first class on the battleship Utah,
Really?
which was sunk. It was just a hoax, but it was sunk at Pearl Harbor.
Now, you mentioned Pearl Harbor. Do you remember where you were at Pearl Harbor when you found out about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I was in Kingsville, Texas,
And how did you find out about it?
on the radio.
And do you remember what emotions that brought out?
Yeah, I was less discouraged and sort of exhilarated to realize that there was a war on, and I'd finally get to be a soldier.
And how old were you?
15.
So that's something you wanted to do?
Something I wanted to do from the earliest time I can remember.
Now, that brings us to the next question. Why did you enter the military? Were you drafted, or did you enlist? Or?
I volunteered. Well, what happened was I was in college. I'd had about a year of college in engineering, and they came and gave a test to all the men. And on the basis of the test, then they made an offer for you, if you scored well enough on the test, an offer to enter one of the special programs. And when you filled out the thing, they ask you your preference for service. And I knew I was too short for the Air Force, and I couldn't swim, so that led out of the Navy, so I checked Army. And after the test was done, then I got a letter from the Army inviting me to enlist in the special program. And the special program was the Army Specialized Training Program. That you'd enlist, and after boot camp, then you'd go to college and get an engineering degree and a commission once you finished your engineering
And that's what
studies.
you ended up doing?
Well, I ended up, I was fortunate in the sense that I ended up going to basic training at Fort Hood, infantry training. There were a whole bunch of us ASTP. I mean, everybody there had an AGCT score higher than was required for officers. And it was really kind of fun taking infantry basic. The fun part was when they had the field, when one of the people got up and gave one of these lectures, with all the things, and then asked, are there any questions? That was a mistake. He did that only once, and then he stopped because all these smart guys out there were asking questions and made him sound like a fool. But it was, I was lucky that we got infantry basic training. Not all of them did.
So what was your MOS then? Was it the end?
Yeah, I was mortar squad leader, final MOS. But I noticed on my discharge it said also I was machine gun squad leader.
So you went through training in the United States. And
Yeah.
Then at some.
And then I went to, once the training was finished, then I was one of the group that got sent to Ohio State. And there we were put up in the former girls' dormitory and started our engineering training classes. And we were there only a few months, and then bang, Congress killed the whole program. Because they were having, Army was worried about the casualty rates in Italy. And they didn't have enough infantry replacements. And then they were, of course, planning for a D-Day. They thought, well, we need more. So they killed the whole program and sent us down to Camp Camel. And there, they didn't send everybody to Camp Camel. They sent them all over the place. When I got there, they gave you a thing to sign out for the 14th Armored Division, and you could indicate on there what branch of the service you wanted. And I put down cavalry. I don't know why. but they put me in the infantry.
So what year was this?
This would have been 1943.
So at what point in time did you go overseas?
It was October. We landed in France in October of 1944, and we went directly up to the Franco-Italian border in the Maritime Alps to relieve the paratroopers that had actually landed it, invaded, and they were occupying.
Now, let's back up just a little bit. What division were you assigned to at this point?
What's that?
What unit were you assigned to at this point? When in October of '44, what unit were you assigned to?
It was the 19th Armored Infantry Battalion.
And was that under a division?
Yeah, the 14th Armored Division.
And
Company B, second platoon, mortar squad, 60 millimeter mortar squad.
and you're the platoon leader?
I wasn't then. No, I was just an ammunition carrier in the
Okay.
squad,
Okay.
and I got to be leader when I was the only one left standing.
Oh, okay. Now, so you landed in France. Where
We landed at Marseille and just, wasn't opposed. The ship docked there, and then we were dumped out and waited for a while, and then we just went up to the Franco-Italian border in a perfectly safe, or rather, it's a quiet line. They needed the paratroops some other place, and they put us up there. We got a little problem with artillery to go to from the town we were that we were stationed in up to the positions up on the mountain. You had to cross an area, a big valley, and you had to do it 50 yards apart, because if you got any closer together, there was a German long distance heavy artillery would fire a round or two into the valley.
Wow.
But then there's nothing doing when we got up there. The paratroopers, of course, they saw these green people, and they filled us full of all kinds of horror tales.
What that?
Yeah, thought we were going to be at any moment overrun.
I apologize for having to do this. Hold that thought. There's something going on in the
Yeah,
front I
sure.
need to deal with. I'm going to be back in just 2 seconds. I'm going to leave that camera rolling.
You may have to speed things up. I'm full of malarkey.
I apologize. I don't know if you heard that alarm kept going off. Okay. I'm sorry.
Are we on, or
Yeah, we're on.
oh, still on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay, you'll have to edit it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So,
actually, we didn't have any combat at all down there on the border. Although the units to our right there, they were Rangers. They had all kinds of fights going on over there.
now, so how old are you at this point?
I was 18.
So what's that like being an 18-year-old in the middle of the...
I was fascinated by all these things. Well, I'm a little worried because going the way up there to the positions, I had lost my entrenching tool. So when we got up there with the paratroopers, I asked if anybody had an extra one. They kind of giggled a little. And they said, here, have this one. So they gave me the entrenching tool, and they went off.
Now, you said
And it was solid rock everywhere, so
didn't do much good.
it wouldn't have done any good. You couldn't dig a hole anywhere.
So, where exactly are you at this point?
And up above the village of Sospel in the Franco-Italian border in the Maritime Alps.
Now, do you remember where you were and the details on when you did first see combat? And you can put that down, sir, if you
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, we never had any combat, although every morning, according to the paratroopers, the Germans would be running patrols. And they said, and they pointed out there was a German corpse out there in front of the lines. And they said, now don't go out there in the daylight because that's under observation by snipers. over there, the German snipers. So in the morning, well, you had to get out and get ready before dawn in case the German patrols came out. You'd be ready for them. So, and there were no foxholes. What they had built little cairns of rocks. You built, and then you could put your shelter half over that, and you had a place to sleep, and you were safe from any artillery that might come in, unless it landed in a tree or on your place. So.
Did you ever experience any artillery coming in?
No, there was no incoming. There was going over. And we were relieved there. We only didn't spend much time there. We were relieved by the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They were all Japanese.
Really?
Yeah. We understood we were being relieved, and then the first thing we noticed coming up the road, here were these Japs.
What was that like? That must have been bizarre.
Well, kind of bizarre, but then they had paid no attention to the. We had a person stay at the edge of Suspel stationed there that he was to tell everybody they had to go 50 yards apart. And they didn't pay any attention. They just went across there and they got shelled. They lost about 5 or 6 men in the thing, but it didn't bother them. They'd come from Italy and these were really hard. Well, like the paratroopers, these were experienced soldiers. In fact, they had more medals than any other.
Really?
We didn't know that at the time.
Now, you're 18, so your mother and father, were they alive at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you communicate with them?
I'd write an occasional letter, although I didn't write too many letters.
And the letters, can you, for the people who might watch this video don't
Yeah.
understand,
Yeah.
can you talk about how the letters worked? And
Yeah, I would get letters from them. I did finally send a letter when I got wounded the second time. The first time, there was no telegram sent. But I figured the second time, since I got hospitalized, they'd probably be sending a letter, a telegram. And they did. I didn't find out till after the war. I got back. My mother, she received the telegram. And the post office guy who brought the telegram to her, she read the telegram and said, your son has been slightly wounded in action. And she asked him, what does this mean, slightly wounded in action? He said, oh, I got that telegram. My son, he lost his foot.
that was slightly.
I had the sense at the time, but it was sometime later, I wrote a letter explaining that, that I wasn't seriously hurt.
Now, well, tell us about the first time you were wounded.
Oh, it was just a bullet through my earlobe. A sniper in this, we were fighting in this town, house to house sort of thing. And we had an outpost. And I was up there, and we had a light machine gun we brought there, but unfortunately the tripod had been damaged by a shell had burst in the room and damaged the tripod. So they just set the machine gun up on a bureau pointing out the window down the road. And I was in there with another guy, and I say, oops, that thing is not going to, that belt won't feed the way it's sitting there. I'll have to straighten it up. So I straightened it up, and about the next thing I was on the floor. The bullet had gone right through my earlobe and the back of my helmet, and that jerked back and knocked me flat. I stuck my fingers up there. Oh, my brains are running out. But there was a guy in the next room on the telephone going back to the company. And so he apparently called back and told him something, but at any rate, so they took one of my bandages and put it on my ear and said, you better go on back to the aid station because that looks kind of dirty. I got back there, why? They said, what are you doing here? We got word you were dead. So that was a terrible day because then the aid man there, who was in our mortar squad ordinarily, he went with us, but he was and he said, oh, I'll put a bandage on that, a better bandage on that, and some sulfur powder. About that time, shells started coming in, and we dived under a incubator, a big iron thing that was in there. We were under there, and he said, okay, I'll put some sulfur on that. And he handed me this packet, and it said SALT on it. He got that straightened out. But then, I'll tell you, I don't know whether I should tell you this story or not.
Please
but
do.
I'll tell you. And I don't tell it to ladies, but at any rate, so he put a bandage on this and he said, you really ought to go back to the aid station and have them clean things up here, so, because that looks kind of dirty. And I said, where's the aid station? He said, oh, it's just across the road. And of course, crossing the road was not a safe thing to do, but you had to get across. So I went across to where the aid station was, just a house. And I didn't see or hear anybody. There was a hall leading down the house, and there were doors on each side. So I went opened the first door. And there, seated at a table, were 3 corpses, 3 dead GIs were seated there, and there were some cards on the table and some poker chips. And it was a gruesome thing because the nearest guy had no chin. His tongue was hanging out. The other guy had blood all covered with dust, and I don't know about the third one. And I thought, oh my God, this is the aid station. At about that time, I stepped out of that room, and then a door opened across the way, and there was a guy said, what are you doing here? I said, is this the aid station? He said, oh, no, they moved it out a long time ago. And he said, come on, I'll show you how to get there. And he went by the room that he'd come from. There were 2 guys sitting there at a table. It wasn't until years after the war that I finally realized that macabre scene that I saw had been set up by these guys just as a joke.
These were Germans, I assume.
No, they were Americans.
Really?
But, there was no place you couldn't bury anybody. The ground was frozen solid, and you couldn't get out to bury anybody, so they just left. Well, the corpses would keep, so they just left them there.
Now that was
When I got back there to the aid station, though, everybody came around, and these guys were laughing and joking, and one said, hey, Captain, he called the surgeon over there. He said, come look at this one. And the surgeon came over, and he looked at it, and he said, kid, if I put a piece of gut through that, when it heals, you'll be able to wear an earring. How about it? I said, no, thank you, sir.
So that was the first time you were
Yeah,
wounded?
that's right.
What about the second time?
Oh, the second time I just got a piece of shrapnel in my arm.
And where was that?
Oh, that was right on the Rhine River. We had taken that town, and we're clearing it up. And we were walking around the street, and there was a lot of mortar fire coming in. And one of the rounds landed apparently in a pile of horse manure, as far as I could figure. And I had a little hole in my jacket. And someone was going to cut the thing off. Said, no, this jacket is too valuable. So I took it off, and there was just a little whole puncture wound there in my arm. And one of the officers thought, oh, this is nothing. You don't have to go back to the aid. But one more senior officer said, oh, no, we don't. This may be a dirty wound, so go back to the aid station. They looked at it and said, we can't do anything about it. We'll just, they put me on an ambulance and sent me back to the field hospital, along with 3 Germans, 3 German walking wounded. When we got back to the field hospital, they sent us all, the 4 of us, the 3 Germans and me, on a bench. And then they started taking people. They took 1 German, then another German. There was me and the German left. And they came around and said, hey. And one of them said, what? I said, I'm a GI. Oh, we thought you were German. And they said, what made you think that? And they pointed to my collar. We had, in a previous day, we'd gotten into this one German village, and we were ransacking this house, the house of the German, the Nazi mayor. And he had a uniform hanging there. It had this beautiful little golden eagle with a swastika pin. I took that off and put it on my collar. And apparently they thought I was a German. Oh, well, that's another story. Ridiculous.
What, the story about you getting shot through the ear certainly must have been exciting for you. What other experiences did you have during the war that you'd like to share that you thought were?
Well, war is it's not hilarious, but war is you just have to become accustomed to something, but they're always a shock. The first time we were ever in an attack mode, we were trying to clear the Germans out of this little village, and we were kind of behind everybody else. But we got up there, and this one GI was saying, I killed him, I killed him. I said, he wouldn't stop, I shot him. And we got up there, and there was this poor old middle-aged German in a ditch there with blood running down his face. And that was the first time apparently this guy had ever killed anybody. But it was kind of a shocker to see some poor man who wanted to give up got shot.
So,
in fact, yeah, at one time I wrote a list of all the corpses I'd encountered. The first one was in Marseille when we were still had just gotten off the boat. And they brought our vehicles up there and had a vehicle thing. And the vehicle park was just beyond a big slit trench and other things, a latrine where you had to go. And the commanding officer, the colonel, lieutenant colonel, he got the Frenchmen sneaking in there and stealing gasoline out of these vehicles. So he put out an order that he'd set a guard on the thing and with orders to shoot anybody after dark that showed up. Well, of course, you had to go around the motor pool to get to the slit trench. So one night I went down there with several other people, and all of a sudden there was a shot. And we were back to see what was happening. And there was this poor guy lying on the ground, dead. His chest was all covered with this really light pink stuff. It turned out that was his lung. It had been penetrated, so that's what aerated blood looks like. It's kind of bright pink rather than red. But it turned out that the guy who was on guard, this was a friend of his, who started to go through, and he said, halt, or I'll shoot. And he said, this guy just said, screw you. And I shot him. That was the first casualty in France. I don't know how they covered this up. Well, they covered certain things up. In fact, when I was, after the old squad leader got injured and had to go to the hospital, and I was the only one left, I got 4 replacements, and I was the squad leader. I was a sergeant, and these 4 replacements, one of them, I borrowed some money from him. I got a pass to go to Brussels, but didn't have any money. So he'd been paid, so he lent me $60, and I went on the pass, came back. And then the next time, when we were in a rear area being replenished, and these were training these guys. And we got up and we got in, long story, but anyway, we got into this German town, and then we got out into the countryside and stopped. And there was a farmhouse. We went in the farmhouse with a squad, and we decided, hey, well, why don't we check things out? So somebody went down in the basement cellar and came up and said, hey, look what I got. We got a ham and potatoes down here. Let's cook something. And I said, oh, sure, that's a good idea. But let's see what we've got to cook it in. And I leaned over to look under the sink. And I'd been carrying a little pistol that I picked up the day before from some German aid men that were in the woods. And I found one of them was lying on this thing, so I took the little pistol and had it in the shoulder holster. I leaned over, the pistol fell out, bang, and it shot the squad member right in the crotch. Well, it missed his important parts, but I don't know how I think they just nothing ever happened after that, except the platoon sergeant that I'd known for a long time, and we got along well. He finally said, "Look, give me that pistol." Said, "You're a danger to yourself and others." But apparently he covered it up and just, made it a wounded in action. So the kid got evacuated, which was good because the other three were killed along with a old squad leader who came back. They were killed on 2 days before the end of the war by friendly fire. There was some confusion about who was doing what, and they were advancing on this village, and the nearby unit that was alongside them, somebody saw them and called in the heavy artillery. And apparently they got a 155 millimeter shell right in the middle of the squad and killed all but killed the old squad leader and 3 of the 4 replacements. Only 1 of them survived. That's war.
Now, so you started in France, and then where did your unit end up progressing to toward the end of the war?
Oh, we went up to Alsace, and from there we went from the Alsatian area into the Saar, the part of Germany that was across the Rhine, just north of, with the northern border with France. And I got wounded just as we got to the Rhine River. We were trying to take a town with a bridge, but they blew the bridge, and I got wounded and evacuated. And after that, the whole division was transferred to the Third Army from the 7th and put under Patton, and then they went all the way through Germany chasing the Germans. So we ended up down in Bavaria, and I didn't get back to them until the war was over. I was lost in the replacement depots.
So you were wounded 3 times?
What's that?
So you were, how many times?
2, just 2.
2, okay.
Yeah, they checked the wound when I got back to the first hospital, and it was infected. So they kept me on penicillin for about 2 weeks, and I was really eager to get back to the outfit because that hospital started picking up wounded from the unit, and they came back. I talked to some of them. They said, "You got to get back up there." Said the Germans are on the run, and we're getting all kinds of wonderful loot, pistols and cameras and everything you might want. I tried to get out, but they wouldn't let me go.
So the war ended while you were in the hospital?
No, I got out of the hospital on about the 1st of May, and then going through the replacement depots. And then I got all the way down to in Germany, and they said, "Uh-oh, you're in the wrong army. Your unit is over in the 3rd Army, not the 7th. So you've got to go back to one of the replacement depots and start over from there. The only way you could," I said, "How am I going to get back?" And they said, "Oh, there's a convoy of trucks that are leading. They've got a whole bunch of German prisoners that they're trying to find a prison camp to put them in." Said, "If you'll just ride as a guard on the thing, well, you can ride back in the trucks, and then you'll get back there and get back to civilization." And several other people. So we went down there ready. We helped push and shove and put the Germans on. They were all old men and young boys. I mean, some as young as 14, and men, in their 50s. Well, we managed to pack them into these 6x6s. And then we got ready to go on our ride. At that point, a bus turns up, and it dumps out a whole bunch of second lieutenants who run and jump in in the cabs of all the trucks. And then said, "Oh, well, you're a guard. You can ride back with your..." So I had to ride in the back of the truck with all these German prisoners. And it was cold. It was snowing, in March or April. I don't know. In May, it was still snowing. And it was quite a ride. I had an M1 but I didn't load it with any ammunition. So the rule was whenever the truck stopped, you had to get down and make sure that none of the Germans jumped off and ran away. Well, they weren't going anywhere. In fact, they were concerned about my health and fitness. They offered to share their blankets with me, and I said, no, because I didn't want to get lice at that point. And then they said, well, food? I didn't have any food. Oh, would you like some of our food? And I saw their food. It was canned fish. No, thank you. So I got to know them pretty well, and we finally pulled up at some place, and I was kind of trying to clamber down from the truck, and one of the Germans who spoke English said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Okay, let me. I'll hold your weapon." So I gave him one and climbed down, and he handed it to me, and everybody was happy. Unfortunately, the war wasn't over for them, although the war was over by that time. In fact, the war was over while I first was in the 1st Replacement Depot in near Worms. And some kind of entertainment group came along, and so we were in a stadium there with entertainment, some comedy, making jokes and singing, all this sort of stuff. And that was the day the war ended.
Now, at what point did you get to go home?
I didn't go home until January of '46.
Did you stay in Europe that whole time?
Yeah, we stayed in Europe. The division itself for a while was occupying an occupation duty, and then they just disbanded the whole division, and so we were just scattered out all over Germany on our way home. You know, they had units processing the papers of everybody. I ended up, the last unit I was with an anti-aircraft battalion in Bremen.
Now, this
the point system was, they sent people back from after the war was over in Europe. They sent people back on the basis of the points. You got so much for being in Europe, for so much for so many months, and then you got so many points for the combat infantry badge. You got so many points for Purple Heart, so many points for other medals, and they sent everybody home on the basis of that point system. So it was in Bremen that I finally got on the ship in January of 1946. And it was interesting because everybody had been paid off, some partial pay, and all of it was in $10 bills. And on this troop ship going back, I was in one of the bunks down in the hold, and down below me there was a poker game going on all the time, and just hundreds of dollars being passed, because the smallest bet was $10. So it went on for 10 days, I think, steady.
So you finally get home. What was your homecoming like?
Let's see, the homecoming.
Yes, sir.
Well, we debarked there at New York, and then went to another place, and finally got to Texas, where I'd enlisted, so Camp Fannin. And when I got out there, I went home. And I was a great believer in liberal things. So the first thing I did when I got on the bus in uniform was to go back in the back and sit with the Negroes. Not that they were impressed. I thought I was doing my part. Yeah, I remembered. The only one place where you might say I was an act of courage, that was after the war. And we were just being shipped around various places, and I was in a line with a bunch of people waiting to get free beer. And there's some character in front of me was just raving on, talking. He said, "I didn't come over here to save a bunch of goddamn Jews. None of you, nobody did, no American did." has come over to do that. And that was the only brave act I ever made. I said, there's one exception right here. And he shut up and didn't do anything.
So, you have grandchildren?
Yeah.
So, this video here is going to go to the Library of Congress and it'll stay at our museum. So,
Yeah.
theoretically...
Well, I shouldn't say some things. I have some stories, but I don't want to incriminate anybody.
I understand.
There are some where, you know.
So theoretically, your great-great-great-great-grandchildren at some point might stumble upon...
Yeah, that's right.
What would you want them to know about your military service?
Oh, I guess that it was honorable. And that I was volunteer. I wasn't drafted. And I guess I'll just add that I never personally killed anybody up close.
How long did you stay in the service?
What's that?
How long did you stay in the service?
I got out as soon as I got back in January. They were getting rid of everybody, you know. In fact, my discharge reads for the convenience of the service. And I didn't want to stay. In fact, I would have stayed because at one point after the war was over, they offered anybody who would re-enlist to stay in Europe would be given immediate promotion, one step in rank, and a guarantee that if you were accepted by any university or college in Europe, they would pay all the expenses. And I thought, that looks like a good deal. Unfortunately, I wrote my parents, and by the time the letter got there, shortly after that, I got back this letter, which said, you know, your mother will die if you don't. So that killed any chance of staying. I couldn't. But I don't know, that would have been an entirely different future. As it was, the VA, the GI Bill was a great a thing that put me through college to a PhD. Not only that, but the VA also paid for my medical care. This hip, which had cost about $50,000 in a civilian hospital, I got for free. So that, you know, thank you for your service. The government has done a lot of things that really constitute a thank you for your service.
How would you say the war affected your life?
Well, it really didn't take away my interest in things military, because I really recently, well, for about 20 years, I was spent my time, when I finally decided I wasn't a very good college professor. I went with a friend to one of the think tanks in Washington back in '62, which was, you know, concerned with the military and defense and so on. So I found, you know, I got along quite well with the military, and I enjoyed doing studies. I did some for the Center for Naval Analysis, studies of the Vietnam War. And everything I did, my conclusion was, you can't win, get out. But they'd say, oh, thank you. Now don't do it again.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about regarding your wartime experience?
Well, it was a growing up experience, but I never have had any PTSD problems. Well, once. Strange thing. I've never really I never worry about the war. I can think of all these things and they don't really bother me. But I was in Egypt, of all places, on a elder hostel adventure on a ship a boat on the Nile. And I had a little stateroom with a television, and the television was showing programs. One of these programs had to do with Afghanistan, and they had a thing about the military hospital. And one of the scenes there, they were taking a patient into the operating room, and he was making this strange kind of sound, groaning and something or other. And I thought, all of a sudden, I began to cry. I thought, what in the world is this? I mean, why do I care about that? And then I remembered there was only one time I'd ever heard that sound before. That same sound of someone in pain was our gunner, who was a fellow from Arkansas, a hillbilly. But he was the gunner. He carried this mortar around and so on. And we got caught in one place in the woods with German light artillery. The rounds were bursting in the top of the trees and so on. And the standard is, the SOP for being in that situation is to hug a tree as close as possible. I don't know whether he hugged the tree or not, but then when this barrage stopped, there was that sound, that horrible sound of someone, like an animal in pain. I crawled over there, and you could see his uniform was all ripped off on one side, and his ribs had just taken a big slice out of his ribs. You could see the lung and the heart in there. And he was making this awful sound, you know. And he was to all respects dead, but you couldn't do anything about it, so all you could do is call for the medics to try to get someone to them. So I was hearing that sound again, that was the limit of my PTSD, and I figured it out right on the spot.
Well, we thank you for your service, and we thank you for your time to come in here today and tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Well, let me add one thing. The guy who had that terrible end, we really liked him because in garrison, in the barracks, he was a hillbilly, but what he did was on Fridays, he would make up his bunk on Friday night and sleep on the floor so that it'd be ready for inspection on Saturday.
Smart man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, sir.
Okay,
It was an
I'm
honor
sorry.
to meet you.